Hello, everyone, and welcome to this very special conversation with one of the most renowned educational journalists in the world. It is my pleasure to introduce Mr. Andrew Jack, Global Education Editor at Financial Times. Mr. Jack, welcome, and it is a pleasure to speak with you today. As a student who's passionate about climate change and education, I am excited to hear your perspective as someone at the intersection of global reporting and education.
It's great to be with you, and I look forward to our chat.
Thank you. So, my first question is from your perspective as the global education editor at Financial Times, how do you think mainstream media can better spotlight youth led climate action and innovation, especially from regions that are often underrepresented in global discussions?
Well, there's a saying that all news is local, and the more uh, developments, both initiatives by students and others in tackling climate change, but obviously also the effects that we're seeing on the environment and weather and so on, are obviously fundamentally local and vary a lot between regions. And the more, therefore, that local media can be engaged or other opportunities to identify and explore local contexts and give voices to those engaged, exposed, responding to those challenges, the more powerful. If you like, there's a sort of whole ecosystem. And I think it begins with really developing, nurturing, engaging with reporters, with media outlets on the ground. And then often those will in turn get picked up more widely, whether it's by national or international media groups, or indeed on social media and elsewhere. So I think that's the long-standing principle. But of course, as you know, in this current world, we're in a much more sort of horizontal place where everyone has become a content producer or publisher in some form. So it's also really not just the, as it were, traditional media, but the new forms of expression, which provide a lot of power in wider access to ideas and issues and challenges, but also to kind of bring together communities that are interested in those topics. And those in turn can feed into more traditional media, but also have a life of their own that, of course, often we see negative aspects of, but it can also be a really powerful positive force for highlighting trends and bringing about necessary change.
So, from your perspective, local media should be depended on for kind of letting these movements gain traction.
I think that's a starting point, but then obviously also national, global media of different sorts are always open to ideas. The question is having access, and I always encourage people to reach out directly. Obviously there's always huge competition from any media organization of different stories to write about. But the more there's something original and insightful, the more there's a direct contact to the journalist or the editor from those who are engaged in those issues, the more powerful often is the message. And, often you might get ignored or rejected, but over time, I think, the momentum of repeated signals from people who are exposed or active in these issues, the more likely it is that there will be also pick up directly, as it were, even from global media organizations like ours.
Yeah. Now, at the FT, you have explored how health, inequality, and policy intersect, and I think that those themes are very, very deeply connected to climate action. So many young people today, including myself, see and understand how urgent climate crisis is. But then trying to create real world impact can feel overwhelming and frankly anxiety inducing. Personally, that pressure has sometimes led to burnout or even breakdowns. So in your view, how can young people contribute meaningfully to climate work without compromising your mental health? And kind of following up with that, have you ever seen any student led efforts that sparked real policy or community change?
Yes, I mean, you're right. There's the high level picture of global warming and increased unpredictable extreme events and the sort of context of that as we see biodiversity loss and communities that are directly challenged, including through sea level rise and extreme weather causing damage to communities, can seem very depressing. But I think, first of all, it's of course an existential issue, and it's something, therefore, that students of all ages and others more widely need to be tackling to put pressure on policymakers, on companies, and so on to fundamentally both understand, to predict, and to push for more positive change, whether it's through mitigation or whether it's through adaptation. And I think to sort of focus on solutions and addressing and holding accountable decision makers can start to put it in a more positive light. So rather than just thinking about the negative consequences and the sort of the trends that we've been seeing in recent years and decades, it should be about really thinking, how do we bring about change? How do we raise attention to this? Let's try to innovate and come up with approaches to push for change and then to actually enact change. And as we were saying earlier, in the same way that all news and initiatives around this are local, in the same way responses can at least begin at the local level. What you can do within your own community, within your school, your village, to sort of make incremental change that can have a big impact. And so to actually see the results and to be participating in a process, I think is really important and positive, both in terms of tackling these wider issues, in bringing about a more positive attitude to sort of mental health, and in terms of actually making a difference on the ground. So the more proactive, the more tangible, the more applied you can make intentions, as well as just reading about some of the more depressing stuff. I think the more positive and enhancing it can be.
That's really cool. And have you seen any student-led efforts that have had real impact on the communities that they were targeting?
Yes, I mean, there's almost too many to mention, but that's again something that gives me optimism and talks about that positive
Mm.
aspect of intervention, because around the world we do see pushback and ideas and innovation and the engagement of young people in particular in a way that perhaps traditionally they've had less of a voice, less agency, less ability to influence. They've traditionally, in the historic model of education, been the sort of recipients of insights from the teacher, but increasingly this idea that they're engaged with the community, that they're equal partners, that they're part of a dialogue, and that they can do things that make a difference. It's important for their studies, of course, but also for their progression and their personal development. And of course, in this area, it also makes a big contribution to tackling climate change. So, I see it at all levels, but in different parts of the world, I've seen some wonderful initiatives, for example, within schools, where students get together and either they're doing something like, it could be putting solar panels on the roof, it could be thinking about energy reduction, it could be about a garden that they're working on to grow vegetables, it could be outreach into the wider community in which they're operating, and many things there. We at the FT have run a number of competitions, including a number focused particularly on university level students, and we've seen some great examples there of startups or community outreach projects that we've highlighted over the years. And I've seen other groups, governments, non-profit groups, philanthropies that have funded a series of different competitions within schools around the world. So I'm seeing some great examples there, which do give me a lot of optimism.
Yeah, even my own interest in sustainability started through competitions, through competing in pitching competitions, business pitch decks. So that is definitely true. I think the competitions really allowed me as an individual to kind of develop my interest in this subject, and also feel like I have some kind of real world impact. So, and I think it's true for a lot of other people I know personally as well.
And yes, going back to the earlier point, I think of course there are some issues that are over which we have limited power. The pollution, regulation, those are the big policy issues where it's important to try to engage younger people as advocates, to put pressure on decision makers. But of course, young people are also consumers. And while some of the most fundamental changes to tackle climate need to be done by the big decision makers in governments and organizations and companies, individuals do have a role, and I think students can think about areas like, for example, um, you know, um, fashion, where there's a huge degree of waste through disposable short-term purchasing of clothes, which have a massive carbon impact, for example. So thinking about their choices in spending and day-to-day life, in commuting, in what they eat, these are important both to kind of appreciate the complexity, but also to kind of bring about positive change and pressure on companies and others to move in a more positive and green direction.
But something I have at least noticed in my surroundings is that many from older generations, especially older millennials and Gen Xers, see sustainability as a PR buzzword rather than an urgent cause, and that kind of limits us as Gen Z, our ability to make changes in our day-to-day consumer choices, because we depend on our guardians to basically make decisions.
That's true, but I think in many households, even in very traditional hierarchical ones, there are many opportunities to work in a positive way, and I think there are many individual choices you can make, in terms of what you eat, what you dress with, how you travel, how you engage more widely in the world. That where I think younger people can take a lead. I agree, some of the older generation often has more traditional habits and perhaps has not been the best example setters in terms of lifestyles. And I can understand some aspects of it, but I think the next generation, it's there in your future, and therefore it's important to try to engage. And that needn't be conflictual, but it can be, positive small steps that can be framed in a way that hopefully older generations can understand, and even to some degree by shamed into action around. And I see that a lot, where younger people do change their own lifestyles, even where it involves some short-term sacrifice, and that influences their parents as well.
Yeah.
One example, my own son, who's a vegetarian, for example, and that's certainly, I think continues to influence us in our own diets. When we see someone else who's so committed to something that clearly is having a significant impact, it trickles up as well as down, if you like.
Yeah, I mean, in my house, I refuse to wear fast fashion brands, and kind of make sure my parents don't buy them as well, and that has actually had an impact on our consumer choices. So you're absolutely right on that account. Now I saw the summer news reading challenge that you were supporting with Everpoint and the Financial Times, and it's such a creative way to get students engaged with journalism. How important is it to keep the next generation informed about our world events, especially through formats that feel fresh, interactive, and inclusive, which is really important for
Yes,
Gen Z.
yes. I mean, stepping back, I mean, the FT obviously is normally requires a paid subscription, but we decided a number of years ago that for this next generation, so for those in secondary and high schools, we would offer it online for free. And we do that partly because, we do believe in the importance of high quality journalism, in verification, in data, in evidence, in clear writing, and precisely given our global perspective, that idea of highlighting trends and best practices and solutions across the world, not just in a particular country or context. And we think that reading or engaging with this sort of high quality global news is fundamental for the global citizens of the future to understand the realities, to go deeper, whether it's in sort of enriching and enhancing your ability to study in whatever your course might be, whether it's in preparing for the world beyond school, whether it's continued education or going into the world of work, and also developing those skills, of critical thinking, of curiosity, of broader general knowledge, of navigating a global and multicultural world. And I think all of those qualities are both enhanced by reading good quality media, reflecting on it, questioning, comparing with other things that are out there, debating and engaging and applying those sort of ideas. And so that's our broad pitch. People can go to ft.com/schools to see more details. As you say, what we've tried to do in a series of recent news challenges is to slightly gamify that by saying if students who've already signed up to our programs can meet a challenge of reading roughly 6 articles a week, so fairly modest, but to get into that habit of reading high quality media over a number of weeks, that will build hopefully some insights and some skills that they'll continue to pursue to help them progress through life most meaningfully. And so, our news challenge is now shortly to open for this summer. We'd encourage people to sign up and to sign up for our free schools program via their schools and teachers. Those who take part successfully in this news challenge will get a certificate of recognition from us and access to a webinar. And we're exploring all sorts of other initiatives to help to try to showcase. For example, we just closed a student competition also around precisely, can social media be a force for good in democracy? We've just finalized the winners. We'll be publishing those next week. We'll have a report called Navigating the Digital World, which is focused very much on young people and tips and practical advice in a positive sense, as well as, of course, highlighting some of the potential downsides and drawbacks or issues to think about in this online world. So yeah, we very much encourage people to engage with us, engage with our school program, but also to think more generally about the importance of high quality news and question sources. Even if people are getting insights and news through social media, at least to think through what are the sources, what's the quality of the information, who is disseminating that, because of course often, as we know, in social media there's a commercial agenda or even an ideological agenda. There may be incentive to sensationalize, to drive clicks and volume with little regard to the quality of that information. And I think fundamentally, to prepare better citizens for the world and also to encourage democracy and civil society, it's really important to think about those underlying issues of quality of information.
Yeah, I think we all have bad experiences with clickbaity articles and videos, and honestly it's so widely prevalent on all forms of social media, and even on platforms like LinkedIn. You end up finding articles that are just, they have no suspense, no, I'm sorry, no substance, just the title and that's it. So yeah,
Yes,
that's
there's this idea in sort of media literacy of so-called horizontal reading. So in other words, before you click on a TikTok post or something on social media, on LinkedIn or Facebook or wherever, first of all, go onto Google or some other search engine and search the underlying source that's disseminating that, the individual or the platform, and question a little bit where they're coming from, what their background is, and compare that with traditional media, for example, or perhaps official reports from organizations, including scientific research, where there are processes in place of peer review, of editing, of fact checking, because there are facts, there is reality, there is evidence and data, and unfortunately it's risks sometimes being undermined by those with other agendas, as we've said.
true. Now, a lot of students I know use journalism, storytelling, or social media to raise awareness about local climate issues and any issues that their community is facing. Since media can be such a powerful force, what guidance or advice would you offer to young people using these platforms to create real impact?
So I think it's really about, as we said earlier, the local and the direct. It's really about, on the one hand, highlighting the challenges that might be climate related that people are facing, if it's extreme weather, if it's agricultural issues, problems of production, if it's damage to housings or infrastructure, if it's the issue of extreme temperatures that maybe makes it more difficult to live, to operate, to study in school, with school closures or lack of comfort, starting with those issues that are really affecting communities, because they're hugely varied, of course, across the world. And then, yeah, identifying approaches, both talking about the impact of those, but then how people might try to tackle, as we say, either to reverse or stop, or to mitigate and adapt. And thinking about the long-term consequences, what sort of results any of those sort of initiatives have had, being able to sort of demonstrate them in whatever form, and then sharing those as widely as possible, whether it's through social media, whether it's trying to contact more traditional media, whether it's engaging with policymakers or decision makers, including local non-governmental organizations or companies or others, to see how you can make a positive difference.
Thank you so much. Now I have one more question and then you can be free. Finally, as someone who has shaped narratives on education and global affairs, what gives you hope when you think about the role of youth in addressing the climate crisis?
So whenever I visit schools or universities, or engage with different groups of young people or individuals, it does leave me with lots of optimism, because I see a generation that's questioning, that's challenging, that's discussing publicly, as well as in their own sort of small groups and networks and through social media and so on. These are issues of concern, issues that they do reflect on, but they also are kind of perhaps much more dynamic and interactive and engaged in discussing them and trying to respond to them. And I see so many examples, including through the climate challenge that you've been involved with, and some of these other pitching competitions of startups and individual actions by students that lead in a positive direction, both in terms of tackling these big issues of climate and so on, and in the process enriching themselves and their communities. So I see lots of inspiration and excitement. I am a little concerned about perhaps this sense of understandable frustration that older people and decision makers and those in positions of power are not acting fast enough or are not engaging and responding. Perhaps there needs to be greater opportunities for the voice and the action and the place for younger people in decision making directly. And the unfortunate negative consequence of sometimes of that is you see a level of disengagement with debate, or even either people not voting, for example, or voting perhaps for more extreme and populist solutions. And I can understand the sense of frustration with more traditional and established approaches, but I think we also have to be very mindful of the dangers of populism, extremism, authoritarianism, or apathy. I think, for all its limitations, democracy and participation and engagement by the widest number and tolerance are fundamental human values that we need to embrace and continue to maintain. And therefore, to engage in public debate, in political action when it's possible through voting and beyond, and in terms of practical engagement with solutions, as we've discussed, with the community and tackling, amongst others, climate change. And those continue to give me optimism and suggest a way forward that can help us to adapt and survive in this changing world.
I mean, from our side, I know what you're talking about, the apathy that you mentioned. I've seen it around me, because it's often much more easier to kind of ignore this issue, because I've seen a lot of people who think, what can I do, to change this? Because the policymakers, the people, the politicians, they seem to absolutely not care about this issue. So what does it matter if I raise my voice? And so a lot of people kind of, and especially in this digital age, it's very easy to find something to occupy your attention, so they just turn away from it, kind of take the ostrich approach, bury their head in sand. And I can see why that happens, and it's hard. It's honestly hard from where I'm sitting.
You're right. I mean, there's more and more potential distractions. If you want to go down rabbit holes of entertainment or kind of superficial distractions. But so I think that's why it's really important in this sort of overcrowded world to sort of, keep active, to think about, priorities and strategies, if you like, and really focus on positive ways to make a difference that go beyond feeding the beast of social media, which is ultimately basically driving commercial models of large organizations, and think instead about your community, your family, your networks, your schools, and how you can make a positive difference that will really be valuable to yourself and wider communities in the world going forward. I think there are grounds to be optimistic about the possibilities in that domain if you're a little bit disciplined and keep focused.
But yeah, but I've seen a lot of good things come out of young people, a lot of good initiatives, and I see more and more people gain awareness every single day, online and real life. So I believe we can make a change, and we can yet save our species from complete annihilation. So
Yes,
thank
well, I
you
think
so.
your climate challenge is really a big part of that. It's great to see you and others so engaged, and I wish everyone a lot of a lot of success with their efforts. It's really good to. This is a really good reflection of that commitment.
Thank you so much for chatting with me. I genuinely really appreciated you and your perspective as well.
Yeah, it's a
Thank
great
you.
pleasure. Good best of luck.
Thank you. Have a great day or night.
Thank,
I'm quite sure.
thanks so much.
Yeah.